I now give the floor to Ms. Kayoko Gotoh.
You have the floor, madam.
Mr. President, well into its 5th year, the war in Ukraine is becoming deadlier by the day. In the last week alone, we witnessed one of the largest aerial bombardments of Ukraine since the Russian Federation's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Between 13 and 14 May, the Russian Federation reportedly launched more than 1,500 drones and dozens of missiles targeting Ukrainian cities across the country. In a deadliest incident of this massive attack, on 14 May, a Russian missile reportedly flattened a 9-story apartment block in Kyiv's Davnitsky district. 24 people, including 3 girls aged 12, 15, and 17, were reportedly killed. At least 48 others, including 2 children, were reportedly injured. On 13 May, strikes on more than 20 localities across Ukraine, including in western regions, reportedly result in numerous civilian casualties. These large-scale attacks have continued daily, including in Dnipro and Odessa, resulting in further civilian casualties and damage to critical civilian infrastructure. Last month alone, at least 238 civilians were killed and 1,404 injured in Ukraine. This represents the highest monthly number of civilian casualties recorded since July 2025. It also reflects a continuing pattern of rising civilian harm. Since February 2022, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has verified that at least 15,850 civilians, including 791 children, have been killed in Ukraine. Another 44,809, including 2,752 children, have been injured. Actual figures are likely significantly higher. Mr. President, inside the Russian Federation, reported Ukrainian strikes have also led to increasing civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure, including 2 residential buildings. Just this Sunday, 17 May, 4 people have reportedly killed in large-scale Ukrainian strikes across the Russian Federation, including in Moscow. Earlier, in an attack on 15 May, 4 people, including a child, were reportedly killed in Ryazan. We strongly condemn all attacks against civilian and civilian infrastructure wherever they occur. As we have repeatedly underscored, such attacks are prohibited under international humanitarian law and must end immediately. Mr. President, last week, United Nations personnel in Ukraine were involved in 2 alarming drone-related incidents. On 14 May, a United Nations vehicle was struck twice in Kherson, where repeated drone attacks have made life extremely dangerous for civilians. The clearly marked vehicle was part of an interagency humanitarian mission led by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The mission had been notified to the parties well in advance. This followed an incident on 12 May when another clearly marked United Nations vehicle that was part of a World Food Programme humanitarian convoy was reportedly hit by a remote-controlled drone in Dnipropetrovsk region. International law, including international humanitarian law, must be respected at all times. Civilians, including humanitarian relief personnel, as well as civilian objects, must be protected at all times. My colleague from OCHA will address this in her statement, as the United Nations is working to establish the full facts surrounding these unacceptable incidents. Mr. President, amid rising devastation and loss of life, on 9 May, the Secretary General welcomed the announcement of a 3-day ceasefire from 9 to 11 May between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. We commend the efforts of the United States to facilitate this agreement, which allowed for a brief pause in the large-scale strikes targeting major cities. However, we regret reported violations on both sides throughout the brief truce, mainly along and near the front line. We are also deeply disturbed by the escalation of attacks by the Russian Federation almost immediately following the expiration of the ceasefire. Mr. President, on 9 May, the Secretary General also welcomed the announcement of an agreed exchange of 2,000 prisoners of war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, mediated by the United States. As a first step, 205 prisoners from each side were returned on 15 May. We urge the sides to finalize the details and fully implement all phases of the agreed large-scale exchange for the sake of the remaining prisoners and their families. We also urge the sides to continue talks towards further exchanges. Separately, we remain concerned about the fate of deported and forcibly transferred Ukrainian children. Their prompt and safe return will require consistent engagement by both sides. Last month, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict visited Ukraine and the Russian Federation as part of the United Nations commitment to support these efforts. I echo the Special Representative's call that our work must be guided by the lives behind the numbers. Each child's case is unique and requires an individualized, independent, and impartial assessment rooted in the best interest of the child and the preservation of family unity wherever possible. Mr. President, 1 year has passed since direct negotiations between Ukraine and the Russian Federation resumed. Although direct talks, which are currently paused, have yet to result in a breakthrough, diplomacy has made it possible for thousands of prisoners of war to return home and for remains of fallen soldiers to be laid to rest. Negotiations should resume without further delay to prevent further escalation and to make meaningful progress towards a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. Dialogue grounded in genuine political will and adherence to the United Nations Charter, international law, and relevant United Nations resolutions is the only way to achieve a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. The United Nations remains ready to support all meaningful efforts to that end. Thank you.
我感谢
I thank Ms. Gotoh for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms.